I know how deeply you, the entire nation, and I think I may say the whole world, sympathize with me in the irreparable loss we've all suffered.
The pen was already waiting beside the royal authorization when Prince Edward entered the room. King Charles believed the decision was moments away from becoming official. Camilla would receive unrestricted access to Windsor's private royal areas, but Edward did not congratulate him. He placed a sealed memorandum across the document, looked directly at his brother, and delivered a warning that stunned everyone present. Without Privy Council approval, the order would go no further. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles kept one hand beside the unsigned order, but the confidence had left his face. The authorization was more than a household note. It was a royal instruction changing who could enter protected parts of Windsor. The Privy Council, an official body that advises the sovereign on state and constitutional matters, had not approved it. Edward knew that omission changed everything. His brother was not simply opening rooms to his wife. He was expanding her access to private apartments, guarded archives, ceremonial chambers, and records tied to the continuity of the crown. Edward spoke carefully because he understood where the wound would land. He told the king affection could not replace procedure, or marriage erase boundaries built to survive every reign. Charles stared at him in wounded disbelief. The monarch had expected loyalty, gratitude. Instead, the youngest brother had placed restraint between him and the woman he had spent years defending. Camilla waited in the adjoining room, certain the delay involved a missing signature or routine correction. An aide entered and explained that Edward had formally stopped the order. She did not answer at first. The queen consort lowered her eyes, then asked whether he believed she could not be trusted. Her patience hardened into humiliation because the refusal did not feel technical. It felt personal. Edward opened the memorandum and pointed to the sentence he had marked. The wording extended beyond ordinary spousal access. It could allow future sovereigns to reclassify protected royal spaces through private command, weakening safeguards that belong to the institution rather than one family member. He had consulted the constitutional language before arriving, and he knew precisely which line could halt the authorization. Charles asked who else had seen the memorandum. Edward paused. That silence carried more force than an accusation. The king understood that his brother might not be acting alone, and Camilla understood that resistance could already be moving through the family. What appeared to be a disagreement over one locked door was about to expose the private fears, old loyalties, and unresolved wounds of every person gathered behind Windsor's walls. For Charles, the authorization was an act of trust toward the woman who had stood beside him through decades of judgment. For Camilla, it was proof that she was no longer a tolerated outsider. For Edward, however, the document represented something far more dangerous. The moment private devotion began rewriting public duty, none of them entered the dispute without scars, and none could retreat without sacrificing something deeply personal. Charles remained beside the closed folder long after the argument had ended. He had not viewed Windsor access as a reward, but as recognition of Camilla's place beside him. Windsor was more than a royal residence. It was one of the monarchy's most important working homes, filled with private apartments, historic records, and rooms connected to the duties of the crown. To the king, keeping his wife at a distance from those spaces quietly suggested that she was still being tolerated rather than fully accepted. Charles spoke to one trusted aide in a low voice, admitting that Edward's intervention felt less like constitutional caution and more like a judgment on his marriage. The monarch had fought for years to protect Camilla from public hostility, family suspicion, and the shadow of the past. Now his own brother appeared to be drawing another line around her. He closed the authorization folder slowly, but the hurt in his expression revealed how deeply the refusal had struck. Camilla sat alone in the adjoining room as her tea turned cold. She asked the aide whether Edward truly believed she could not be trusted. The queen consort received no clear answer, and that hesitation wounded her more than a direct accusation might have done. She had endured years of scrutiny to stand beside Charles, yet one unsigned document had suddenly made her feel like an outsider again. Edward carried a different burden. His quiet manner had often caused people to underestimate him, but he had spent years studying the customs that protected the monarchy from impulsive decisions. Protocol, the accepted system of rules guiding royal conduct, mattered because it prevented private emotion from becoming permanent authority. He did not oppose Camilla's presence. He feared what the wording could allow. Edward confided in Sophie during a private conversation that the authorization extended beyond the Queen Consort herself. It could also grant access to people acting under her authority, creating an undefined circle of influence inside restricted parts of Windsor. The trusted confidant listened carefully, then understood the real danger. Her husband was not trying to humiliate Camilla. He was trying to stop Charles from creating a precedent that future sovereigns could misuse. Sophie asked what had first made him suspicious. Edward hesitated before mentioning a private incident at Windsor months earlier, one the household had deliberately kept from reaching the king. To understand why Edward risked confronting his sovereign and brother, the story must return to the quiet Windsor ceremony, where one seemingly harmless request changed everything. Months before the confrontation, Windsor hosted a private ceremony honoring years of royal service. The evening appeared flawless, until a senior household official discovered an unauthorized request bearing Camilla's office seal. It asked that one of her personal representatives be admitted into a protected suite containing family correspondence and ceremonial inventories. The representative never entered. Yet when Edward learned how close the request had come to approval, he understood that the palace's safeguards were already beginning to bend. Charles entered the crimson drawing room, believing the night would strengthen the bond between the royal household and the employees who had served it for decades. The private service ceremony was a small formal gathering created to recognize long and loyal duty. Camilla stood beside him, while Edward and Sophie joined senior staff and veteran workers, whose lives had been shaped by Windsor's routines. Nothing about the occasion suggested danger. Camilla had made one practical request during the preparations. She wanted temporary access to a nearby historic suite so several ceremonial objects could be reviewed for a future reception. The suite mattered because it also held private family correspondence and protected inventories recording valuable royal items. Her original request named only approved household staff, and the arrangement appeared careful, limited, and respectful. A veteran custodian noticed the change shortly before the ceremony ended. He found that the final access form included one of Camilla's private advisors, a person who had not appeared on the reviewed version. The custodian carried the paper to Edward and asked, with visible unease, whether the rules governing protected rooms had officially changed. Edward read the altered line twice. Then he asked who had authorized it. Edward approached Camilla quietly after the final presentation. He showed her the amendment and asked whether she had requested it. The Queen Consort dismissed the change as a staff misunderstanding, but irritation sharpened her answer. She felt questioned in front of people whose respect she had worked years to earn. He saw that hurt, yet her reaction did not remove his concern. Edward learned the full truth later that night. The advisor's name had been added after the request passed its first review, bypassing the required second authorization for anyone entering a protected suite. The breach had failed only because the custodian noticed it in time. No one entered, but the safeguard had come dangerously close to collapsing. Sophie found her husband alone, studying the form again. The trusted confidant watched him circle the altered sentence and heard him say the danger was not what happened that evening. The danger was what everyone might accept the next time. Edward ordered the incident preserved in a confidential memorandum, a private written record kept for formal reference. Months later, he placed that same document before Charles. The old access form had remained hidden in Edward's files, but once he laid it before the king, private suspicion became an unavoidable confrontation between brothers. When the doors closed, there were no cameras, no applauding crowds, and no ceremonial smiles to protect them. Charles stood at one end of the library, while Edward remained beside the unsigned order. Between them lay the old Windsor access form, its altered wording marked in dark ink. The king demanded that his brother withdraw the objection. Edward refused. Then Charles spoke the sentence no one in the family expected to hear. "You will not override me in my own house." Charles dismissed the aides before anyone could record the confrontation as an official household meeting. Camilla stayed near him, while Sophie remained beside Edward, each of them understanding that one careless sentence could deepen the wound. Windsor was not only a family home, it was also a constitutional property, meaning parts of it were protected by inherited rules tied to the crown rather than the private wishes of the person living there. That distinction now stood at the center of the argument. Charles pushed the authorization folder across the table. He accused his brother of hiding personal suspicion behind procedure and using old rules to embarrass Camilla. The king insisted that his wife should not need permission from committees to move through the home she served. His anger carried years of resentment. Every restriction placed around her felt, to him, like another public verdict against the woman he had fought to defend. Edward did not raise his voice. He told the monarch that respect was not the issue. Camilla's dignity was not the issue. The danger came from asking the monarchy to confuse loyalty to one person with loyalty to the crown. He reminded Charles that protected rooms, records, and ceremonial holdings could not be treated like private drawing rooms simply because the sovereign wished it. Camilla stepped forward and challenged Edward directly. She asked whether he believed she had ordered the earlier amendment to the access form. The Queen Consort's voice remained controlled, but the hurt beneath it was unmistakable. He refused to accuse her. Instead, he confirmed that someone working through her office had added the advisor's name after the first approval had already been granted. Sophie watched Charles before he answered. The trusted confidant saw the king glance toward Camilla, brief but revealing. Edward noticed it too. That single movement suggested the monarch might have known more about the earlier request than he had admitted. Charles reached for the pen, then set it down with sudden force. He declared that the matter would go before those constitutionally empowered to decide it. The Privy Council, the body that formally advises the sovereign on serious state and constitutional matters, would now review the disputed order. The argument had escaped the family circle, and once constitutional authority entered the room, affection would no longer determine who controlled Windsor's most guarded thresholds. The monarchy often appears to move through spoken commands, signatures, and ancient certainty. But hidden beneath that certainty are clauses designed for moments when personal will collides with inherited restraint. Edward had found one. It did not remove Charles's authority, nor did it accuse Camilla of wrongdoing. It did something more devastating. It required the king to justify the Windsor order before others, and transformed a private promise to his wife into a constitutional test. Edward's objection rested on a dormant governance clause covering protected archives, historic apartments, and rooms managed on behalf of the crown, rather than as part of the sovereign's private household. A governance clause is a formal rule explaining how authority must be used and where limits still apply. The wording had rarely been tested, but its purpose was clear. No monarch could quietly reshape protected access without considering who might inherit the same power later. Charles read the clause alone after midnight. He removed his glasses, placed them beside the papers, and stared at Edward's handwritten note. Future monarchs would inherit the precedent as well as the privilege. The sentence cut deeper than any accusation. The king had believed he was defending Camilla's dignity. Now the document suggested he might be creating a weakness that would survive long after both of them were gone. Edward waited with Sophie elsewhere in the castle, unable to rest. He knew he had wounded his brother, and that knowledge weighed heavily on him. The trusted confidant asked whether he regretted intervening. He admitted that he regretted the pain, but not the decision. Charles could see devotion. Edward could see the door that devotion might leave open. The Privy Council did not gather to decide whether Camilla could enter Windsor at all. Its role was narrower and far more serious, determining whether the expanded access could exist without limits, oversight, or clearly named responsibilities. A senior council secretary reviewed the order line by line and found the wording Edward had feared. It allowed the Queen Consort to authorize accompanying personnel without requiring separate approval. Charles demanded confirmation. The secretary gave it in a documented briefing, then revealed something worse. That broad power had not appeared in the king's first draft. Someone had inserted it during a later revision prepared through Camilla's administrative office. Camilla heard the finding from Charles himself. She denied ordering the change, but the Queen Consort immediately understood what the discovery meant. Suspicion had moved from an abstract rule into her own household. Charles asked one final question. Who approved the revision? The answer pointed toward a trusted member of Camilla's staff, and the constitutional argument had now found a human face. As responsibility narrowed toward her own office, the first loyalties began to fracture. By morning, the proposed Windsor authorization had been frozen. No announcement was made, yet the change could be felt in every carefully controlled movement inside the castle. A scheduled tour was canceled. Security instructions were rewritten. Camilla's private advisor was removed from the access review. Then, shortly before noon, she arrived at a corridor entrance she expected to pass through and found a uniformed official waiting beside a closed door. Camilla stopped before the entrance to a private Windsor apartment, where she had been expected to inspect preparations for a future engagement. The official bowed his head and explained that her clearance had not yet been confirmed. Clearance meant formal permission to enter a protected area, and without it, even the Queen Consort could not proceed. She said nothing for several seconds. Then she dismissed her entourage, refusing to let them stand there and watch her humiliation deepen. The castle had already begun closing around her. Charles's order was suspended. Every recent access request from her office was under review, and temporary restrictions had returned until the Privy Council reached a decision. Household staff had been told to remain discreet, but cancelled appointments and altered schedules carried their own message. Something serious had happened, and everyone could feel it. Charles found Camilla later in a small sitting room. She did not accuse him of failing her. Instead, she told the king that she had never asked to be defended in a way that made her look unworthy of trust. The monarch tried to reassure her, but the words would not settle. He still wanted to protect his wife, yet he could no longer ignore the fact that the order had been written too broadly. The advisor responsible for the revision finally gave a formal account. He admitted that the expanded wording had been intended to make Camilla's future duties easier, but confessed that he had submitted it without fully explaining the consequences to her. The Queen Consort heard the admission and understood the danger immediately. A decision made in her name had now placed doubt over her judgment. Edward learned soon afterward that Charles was considering dismissal. He feared the advisor would become a convenient scapegoat for pressure that had come from across the king's household. Sophie agreed that removing one person might quiet the scandal, but it would not answer the deeper question of how the revision had been allowed to pass so far. Camilla made her decision before Charles could act. She asked to speak with Edward privately, without the king, without Sophie, without advisors, and without documents between them. For the first time since the crisis began, the two people placed on opposite sides of the Windsor door would meet alone and decide whether the dispute ended in bitterness or understanding. Camilla entered the small morning room without an aide. Edward was already waiting, standing beside the window with the original access form folded in his hand. There was no king to defend her, no council officer to support him, and no audience to reward either one for winning. She asked a single question: had he ever intended to stop her personally? Edward placed the document on the table and finally gave her the answer she had feared. Camilla remained still as he said yes, but not in the way she believed. Edward explained that he had never wanted to deny her ordinary access to Windsor or reduce her place beside Charles. He had wanted to stop an unrestricted authorization that blurred the line between the Queen Consort herself, her private office, and anyone acting under her authority. They agreed that nothing said in the room would be carried to the king as an accusation or used to punish household staff. Camilla admitted that the closed corridor door had reopened an older wound. Every restriction reminded her that acceptance inside the monarchy had never felt permanent. Her voice faltered when she explained that the order had represented belonging, not control. To her, it was proof that she no longer stood outside the institution waiting for permission to enter. Edward listened without interrupting. He then confessed that confronting Charles had caused him genuine anguish. The younger brother had not seen an ambitious woman trying to seize power. He had seen a monarch prepared to weaken a safeguard because he believed love demanded it. That frightened him more than any deliberate challenge could have done, because good intentions often created the most lasting precedents. Camilla finally disclosed the truth through that private conversation. She had not read the expanded revision before it reached Charles, yet the Queen Consort refused to place all blame on the advisor. Her office had become too eager to predict what she wanted, and that culture had allowed one person to widen the order, without asking the questions that should have been asked. Camilla then proposed the solution herself. She would withdraw the unrestricted request and replace it with a defined access charter, a written agreement listing exactly which rooms she could enter, what duties justified that access, who could accompany her, and what oversight would remain. Edward studied her carefully before agreeing to support it. Edward added one condition. She had to tell Charles personally that the original order must be abandoned. No aide could soften the message. No council officer could carry it for her. The battle was no longer Edward against Camilla. It had become a test of whether she could surrender the symbol Charles had offered, without making him feel that his devotion had been rejected. The secrecy broke just after sunrise. Across London, one newspaper appeared with a black and white image of Windsor's round tower, beneath the headline, "Edward Stops the King." By mid-morning, broadcasters were debating whether the younger brother had protected the crown or humiliated the sovereign. Outside Windsor's Henry V Gate, a crowd gathered behind barriers, some praising Edward's courage, others holding signs demanding respect for Camilla. A private family dispute had become a national judgment. Palace officials moved quickly, but every careful word only deepened suspicion. They released a short statement confirming that Windsor access arrangements were under routine governance review. Governance review meant an official examination of how royal rules and permissions were being applied. The phrase sounded calm, yet the public heard what it avoided saying. The king's order had been stopped. His brother had challenged it, and the argument had reached far beyond one private corridor. Edward watched a broadcaster describe him as the man who had placed the institution above the king. The praise unsettled him. He switched off the television because every compliment directed at him seemed to make Charles look reckless. He had never wanted victory over his brother. He had wanted one dangerous sentence removed before it became permanent. Camilla saw the closed Windsor entrance repeated across front pages and television screens. The Queen Consort understood that the image now carried more power than any palace statement. She told Charles that continuing the fight would damage him more deeply than abandoning the order. The monarch resisted at first, insisting that retreat would look like weakness. She answered that pride had already cost them enough. A constitutional commentator then changed the tone of the national debate during a live broadcast. He explained that Edward's intervention had not weakened the monarchy. It had shown why royal power survived. Boundaries sometimes had to be defended from within the family before the public was forced to defend them from outside. The crowd at Henry V Gate grew larger. One elderly woman stepped forward, placed a small bouquet beneath the wall, and left a handwritten card reading, "Duty is not disloyalty." That simple message became the defining symbol of the crisis. It captured Edward's pain, Charles's anger, and Camilla's quiet decision to stop treating restraint as rejection. Charles summoned them both before the day ended. Edward arrived first. Camilla followed moments later. On the table lay a narrowly written Windsor Access Charter, a formal agreement setting clear limits and responsibilities. Beside it rested the original order, still unsigned and ready to be destroyed. With the country watching and the family exhausted, Charles faced one final choice: defend the promise he had made in anger, or preserve the principle his brother had risked everything to protect. Charles entered the final meeting carrying the original authorization himself. Edward rose, but the king gestured for him to remain seated. Camilla placed the revised charter beside the old document and told her husband she would accept Windsor access only within clearly defined limits. For several seconds, Charles said nothing. Then he removed the unsigned order from its folder, tore it once through the center, and declared that no personal promise was worth leaving the crown less protected than he had inherited it. Charles formally abandoned the unrestricted authorization. The Privy Council approved the revised charter, a written agreement defining exactly which Windsor rooms Camilla could enter, which duties required that access, who could accompany her, and what oversight would remain. The decision mattered because protected apartments and royal records belonged to the continuing institution of the crown, not to the personal wishes of one reign. It also confirmed that the Queen Consort remained fully recognized within Windsor's royal life, without allowing ceremonial status to become unlimited authority. Charles turned toward Edward and admitted that the objection had felt like betrayal. The king had spent years protecting his wife from judgment, and his brother's intervention had struck directly at that instinct. Yet he now understood something painful. A man willing to risk affection for duty had not tried to weaken him. He had protected the monarch from leaving behind a dangerous precedent. Camilla lifted the old amended access form and asked Edward not to destroy it. She wanted the document returned to the Windsor Archive, the protected collection where official and historical records are preserved. The Queen Consort said it should remain as a warning of how easily good intentions could cross a boundary when everyone nearby became afraid to say no. He agreed, recognizing that her request transformed humiliation into responsibility. Edward refused every suggestion that he should receive public credit. He told Charles that constitutional restraint was not a victory over the sovereign. It was one of the forces that allowed sovereign authority to endure without becoming captive to anger, fear, or devotion. The younger brother had not defeated the king. He had reminded him where lasting strength came from. Charles kept the revised charter on his desk and rejected the proposed dismissal of Camilla's advisor. Instead, The monarch ordered the approval process restructured so no major revision could again be hidden behind one employee. Responsibility would be shared, recorded, and impossible to avoid. The door eventually opened for Camilla, but only after the monarchy had confirmed who truly guarded its key, and in choosing duty over pride, Charles, Edward, and Camilla left Windsor stronger than they had found it. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.